Yo, what's up? It's Jimmy off of Glitchy Thumbs. We're making characters, we're making games, the glitchy way, my way. In the last episode, we were working on character 3.5, Raz the White Rabbit. I created that character in Procreate and then brought it into Blender to create the 3D model. And I was able to come up with an idle animation and a walk animation. You can see that entire process in the Blender video. Also, I brought it into Buildbox and we created an animation version of it where we can see all the animations of the character. And then also I did 2 mechanics. I did one where it's just a plain mechanic where we test out the joystick, and then mechanic number 2, we used the adventure run template that was in Buildbox, but we switched the orientation to portrait, so that actually changes how the game is played. Definitely check out those videos. I have a whole bunch of characters that I worked on too, and you don't want to miss out on all the stuff that I learned throughout those processes. But in today's episode, we have character 3.6, which is the last character for character set number 3. I've been working on this project for a very long time. I do want to get through all my characters, but I don't know. We'll just have to see. But without further ado, let's get to the video and start creating character 3.6. So we have character 3.6. It's going to be this character in the middle with just a head, and we're probably going to create a humanoid body for the character. We're just going to start with the head first, and he has some futuristic goggles on, and the ears are like handle ears. So the name, I have no idea what this character is going to be. It'll come when I go through the video, and hopefully I'll come up with a better name. So far the words in my head are futuristic goggles and handles for ears, and we'll just have to see. So I use a cube this time around, scale it down to fit it over our reference, and then I add a subdivision surface modifier, change the viewport from 1 to 2, and we get this rounded circular shape, sort of like a sphere. We've been doing this for all the eyes for our character, but it makes sense to use it as a head for this character. It's just much easier to get a circular shape, and my reference is pretty much lopsided, but in the end it's supposed to be a head, and this works perfectly. It's going to make our life so much easier just using it this way. And if you want a more smoother circular shape, you can change the viewport from 2 to 3. It'll do more subdivisions into your shape and get it as smooth as possible. But I just changed it back to 2. I kind of like the low poly design at the moment. We don't need to make it super high quality just yet. Most of my characters are prototype characters anyways, and I try to simplify everything as possible. And having the shape like this works out pretty well. And I press M and I move this to a new collection so that we can start getting the separate objects organized. Name this as character 3.6, and then rename this to head. And it says 0.004 because we have other characters that are using the head naming extension, so that's why there's a number 4. So I go into X-ray mode just to see what I'm working with. We have the head already, and if you're curious about all the other characters on the screen, those are characters in the character set number 3. And if you want to see all those videos, definitely check those out. I have those videos on my YouTube. You can definitely see how I created all the characters from start to finish, and then whatever we did for the game mechanics, if there were any that I thought of, and also anything that I talked about in the videos that were going to be super helpful throughout my entire process that I think would be super educational for people to learn. I recorded all of that too. And now we just need to think about how to create the goggles in the middle, and then also the handles for the ears, because that's what I drew. So I added a plane, scaled that down. We're going to use this for the goggles, and these are some futuristic goggles you'll be able to see later on. Go into X-ray mode, extrude all the way to the right, and then extrude all the way to the left, and extrude all the way to the top so that we can get the entire goggles, and then do a loop cut on the right side using the middle mouse wheel to create multiple loop cuts. And the loop cuts are going to be pretty even, so you can see why I stopped at 2 loop cuts, because in the middle we have that already cut. So I want that to be kind of even. Do the same on the left side, and then also do one in the row at the top. And you can definitely see how I'm aligning everything now in terms of creating my planes, making sure all these edge loops are already aligned before we even move into using the mirror modifier to create the 3D shape. And if you want more subdivisions, that way we have more vertices to work with, you can just create another loop cut in between these squares, and that's pretty straightforward. I did it in all the columns from right to left. And then you can also do the same from the top row all the way down to the bottom row. And everything's even, everything's in quads. It's going to make the UVM wrap pretty simple. And then the texture is going to apply nicely over the goggles. It's going to work out pretty well. So now we need a line around the character to get rid of these sharp edges from the reference. we have more rounded edges for these goggles, and I'm trying to keep everything as symmetric as possible. Of course, my reference isn't symmetrical, it's just something I drew, but in Blender, we can just keep the shapes symmetric and aligned, keeping everything straight as possible. That way everything comes out pretty even. Even though it's a prototype character, I'm still making sure that I do all this right from the beginning. That way I teach myself to be organized from the beginning of my characters all the way to the end, and that's going to take some practice. I'm usually the guy that just goes in and does everything super quickly, and it's going to be super messy if I just always did that. So I have to train myself to organize it in a way in the beginning where I'll continue to do this throughout the entire process. And that's how I've been setting up my characters so far. And since we got the final shape for the goggles, now we can actually just extrude this, delete the middle faces, apply all transforms, apply the quick origin, add the mirror modifier, check the y-axis, and now we have the full shape. We just need to move this by going to edit mode, select everything. We get to determine how wide the goggles are going to be here. So you can spread it apart if you want wider goggles, or if you want smaller goggles, you just keep it close like how I did. And then when you finish, just select the middle vertices and then check clipping and pull it together. That's how the two shapes connect in the middle for the vertices. And then you have your full shape for your goggles. And let's turn on the head to see how these goggles will look like in front of the character. So I drag it to the front. And this looks pretty cool already. We can kind of keep it like this, but it won't really work with the round shape. So we're going to work with this shape to make sure it fits around the head. Let's move these goggles to the character 3.6 folder. And these are technically eyes for the character. So this character probably has no eyes. It just has goggles as eyes. And character 3.6 can actually be goggles. Goggles would be a pretty cool name for the character. That's what I'm thinking about. Just by looking at this character, goggles would work. Goggles the boy. That's what it would be. Goggles the boy. And since we're done with the goggles, I'm going to add another plane. And I think I'm working on the ears now, which are these handle things that you see on the reference. Don't ask me how I came up with this. It was just something I thought of when I was drawing my sketches. If you haven't seen that process, I should have the video of how I came up with these sketches. I did a bunch of squiggles, and then I looked at the squiggles to see what images or characters that I see, and then I just drew them out, outlined them, and those are the characters that came out. Definitely check out those videos too. I should have most of them out. It's interesting what the mind will see. You have a bunch of squiggles and lines on a piece of paper or on anything, and that's what I saw. And these could be from characters that I've seen throughout my entire life, or I don't know. That was just kind of just the imagery that came to my head during this time in my sketch. I actually drew all these characters last year, or was it last year? Possibly. So I was drawing a whole bunch of characters, and then at some point I was like, okay, I'm drawing way too much characters. Let's just at least do something with as much characters as possible. So that's why I started my Blender journey, making sure I use these characters as best as I can, then try to create a game mechanic from the characters that I came up with. So that's how my journey started when I wanted to come back and create some games again. I thought it was pretty cool to come up with all these characters, and then it was time to create them, make them come alive, something I've never done. I mean, I've done it in the past, but I've done it with designers and programmers. But this time around, I want to do it myself and see how much I can get done and start absorbing all of that creativity and building it as a stepping stone and creating momentum for my motivation. And it's been pretty fun actually doing all this. I'm in a very good flow right now, and I'm just going along with it. I think I'm learning a lot throughout this entire process. I'm doing a lot of things that I've never did before, which is interesting. And everything is documented this time, so I can always rewatch anything if I forget. And also, this is kind of like creating my own show in a sense with different episodes. That's how I've been labeling everything. Every day is a new episode if I can record, and I have a whole bunch of content anyways. I'm just doing voiceovers over it, and it makes a lot of sense to listen to the storytelling. And that's how I'm going to be doing it for my games. I think it's cool to actually be able to storytell each character from the beginning, because at some point, maybe some of these characters actually blow up and become superstars. And that's basically what I've been doing for most of these characters, to figure out which one is my next superstar and seeing which characters people like, or even just which characters people don't like. I just want to hear feedback, get some constructive criticism, and go from there. I mean, art is subjective. It really depends on anyone. I just want to put my creations out, see what happens, and then just go with the flow. So for these handle ears, I was planning to extrude it and then curve it all the way to the top, but then that didn't really work well in my mind. What really works well is just extruding all the way to like the left or the right, and I did all the way to the left here, and then just extrude all the way to the top. That way we have a rectangular plane. It's just over the entire reference, and I drag the edges all the way to the left to make sure we get the entire reference. And then from here, I just did a whole bunch of loop cuts in the columns. And again, I'm trying to make this as even as possible. So you can determine why I did that, because I'm looking at the little squares at the bottom for my quads. Because when I do another loop cut in the rows, we can actually get everything to be super even with all the little squares. And that makes a lot of sense. And that keeps everything aligned and organized. That's just how my brain thinks now for most of my sketches. And then I get rid of the dead space for all the other squares that aren't touching the reference at all. And you can visually see that. It makes a lot of sense. You can delete those faces. And then any one of them that is still touching the reference, just keep it there. And then we can just cut those out with the knife tool. And then that makes the entire process much smoother and intuitive. At least for me it is. I don't even know if I'm explaining it right, but hopefully you guys understand. And I've started doing this recently with my previous characters. Just makes a lot more sense to do that. And towards the head, this whole middle part, we can just delete all these faces and just think about how a handle would look like and try your best to visualize that. Even with the sketch, you might not be able to, but just try your best. So I'm just essentially creating the shape, and then all the edge loops is how I'm going to pull out the shape for the 3D shape. And I've been doing that manually just so that I understand how to do that. It makes a lot more sense. If you have a whole bunch of 2D objects that you want to make, you got to understand how it becomes from 2D to 3D, because you're actually pulling everything out from a flat surface. You just have to understand how that process is. That's why I do it the hard way first and then do it the easier way later on. And then for the rest of this, I'm going to be using the knife tool to cut out the rest of the dead space. And if you have close vertices next to each other, you can definitely just wield them together. Makes a lot more sense to do that. There's really no reason to have two close vertices like that if you're trying to create a curve around your geometry. And this is pretty self-explanatory on how to create curves with your shapes, just knifing and deleting the faces, and then aligning any vertices that you see as best as you can to the reference. I've actually been using this method a lot. It just clicked for me one day that, oh, okay, this is how I should have been doing the plane method. It's just more organized, makes more sense when I'm explaining the videos, super easy to follow, especially if you want to create any 3D models from anything. You can pretty much do it for any type of sketch or any object that you would like. It's entirely up to you. You can also purchase 3D objects from the internet. I've actually been thinking about making all these objects and then possibly putting it on a shop or something. That'd be pretty cool. You'll be able to reuse anything that I create, but I haven't gotten to that point just yet. I haven't created anything that's reusable just yet. I have been creating some trees, but I'm still learning that process, and that video is going to be a very long time from now. For the top part, it's easy to cut this out. I like being able to have videos where it's super self-explanatory. I don't even need to explain this part. Just by looking at it, it makes a whole lot of sense what I'm doing. I'm just knifing this curve and then deleting the faces, and that creates the shape for the ears, which are handle ears, we'll say. There's no such thing as handle ear, but you know, in this glitchy verse, I've actually been thinking about creating glitchy verse. Glitchy verse is pretty cool with all of my characters. I think it would be pretty cool to see this universe in real life, but we're a long ways to go for that. And once we have the shape that we want for these handle ears, you can make a decision to make everything more symmetric. And the way to do that is to look at your shape and decide, okay, which side do you like the best? Do you like the top part or the bottom part? And I felt like the top part was a little bit better curved for the handle ears. So for the bottom, I just selected all these vertices and then just deleted them. That way we have half of the shape. And you know what we're going to be doing? We're going to be adding the mirror modifier. That way it mirrors half to the other side. So I uncheck that. And then I'm checking the Z-axis and the Y-axis. And it doesn't seem to be mirroring how I want it to be. I want it to mirror from top to bottom. So I was trying to figure that out, because with the X-axis it's mirroring from left to right, but that's not what I want. It should have done that with the Y-axis checked or the Z-axis checked. I actually don't know. I just like clicking a whole bunch of buttons to see if it'll work. And if it doesn't work, then I have to figure it out. So the way I figured this out was going back into object mode, apply all transforms, the location, the rotation, a whole bunch of stuff like the scale was probably messing everything up in terms of using the mirror modifier. So that's what my first thought would be to fixing this problem. And once you do that, go back into edit mode and then try the mirror modifier again, checking it in the other axis. And now the mirror modifier in the X-axis isn't even showing from left to right. So we definitely did something where it doesn't work anymore. But the reason would be that I didn't apply the quick origin. So there's no origin for this shape for Blender to create the mirror of this 3D object. So I applied the quick origin, went back into edit mode, tested it out in the x-axis, and we can see the other half of the shape, and then tried it in the y-axis, and I actually moved it out of place just to see if there was even a shape, because sometimes it's hidden and you can't really see it. So that's why I moved everything and I didn't see anything. So I checked the z-axis, and now we see the shape that I want from top to bottom, but we just need to move the top part up, and that way we can align this as best as we can. So I moved it up, turned on clipping, and then got it as close as possible, and then selected the bottom vertices, dragged those together in the middle so that those vertices connect with the other side. And if you want to make some minor adjustments to make sure everything has a nice curve to it, you can do so here by selecting these vertices. And I'm trying my best to make these handle ears as perfect as possible, making sure everything's aligned. It's super symmetric now. That's something that I've been working on for a lot of my characters, making sure that it's not lopsided or have some weird shapes that are abnormal, because that's going to come out and look a little bit weird. Even though they're prototype characters, you got to start at some point making them look decent to use as prototype characters. So that's what I've been doing, and it's going to really help throughout my entire journey of making these 3D models. Once we have the shape that we like, we're going to need to apply this mirror. That way it becomes one piece, and then you have the new vertices to work with, and then extrude it, delete the faces, apply all transforms, apply the quick origin, and then now we get to apply another mirror modifier for the other side. Check the y-axis, go into edit mode, select everything, move it to the side, check clipping, x-ray mode, select the middle vertices, and drag them together to connect them. Now we have the 3D shape for the handle ears. We can move this to the character 3.6 collection. This one I renamed to left ear. And when we turn on the other shape, you can start seeing how the character is coming along really nicely. Just moving the ears to align everything. And then you can bring it closer so that it at least connects to the head. And the goggle eyes and the ears are super flat right now. We're going to be pulling them out to create the curvature. Start with the goggles. Select the edge loop on the left and do an edge slide by pressing G while you're moving the cursor. And then select the top edge loop. Move the cursor and press G, do an edge slide. Same thing for the right side, move it in, press G, edge slide. And the bottom edge loop, move it in, press G, edge slide. So the edge slide is just moving along your geometry. So it's not creating more geometry, it's just moving within the geometry you already created. I think that's how I have it in my head on how I remembered what it does. And I think that makes sense. Let me know if it doesn't. It makes sense in my head. That's how you create the curvature around the goggles. And then we need to pull out the edges to make sure we get this 3D shape. So start from the left column and then just move from left to right, pulling out these edge loops to create your 3D shape. Try your best to get it as best as possible. You can look at the top perspective to see if your line is straight. And I'm actually not very good at this because I'm trying to do it as quickly as possible. I think there's a faster way to do it if you use the symmetry button at the top where it has X, Y, and Z. I don't know if you can see that next to options. I didn't know about this before, but I've seen someone do it in a YouTube video. And I was like, we could have just did that and then start from the middle and then just drag the edge loops as we go. And it'll also pull out the edge loops on the opposite end. That way we only do half the work, similar to the mirror modifier. But actually I'll have to try that. I haven't been really doing the plane method as much, so I haven't gotten a chance to try that. But that's something that I've learned that would have been a faster thing to get the shape inflated. I'm trying my best to figure out the fastest way to do things so I can create any 3D model I like. But so far I'm just going with the way that I think works best at the moment to get the job done. Even though it takes a lot more time, it still works, and I'll be able to have that content for the video. And then whenever I find a better solution, I'll be able to have that content too, showcasing that there's multiple ways to do things. Some ways are faster, some ways are slower, and then you just have to make a decision on your own on which ways you want to do it, because you might learn a certain way, and once you learn that way, it gets the job done. You're able to get through your entire process, so why change it? The only reason you would need to change it is because it might be taking up way too much of your time and you want to spend all that other time on something else. But for me, I'm just capturing anything that I learned at the moment in time. And then I don't have an issue of playing the long game, of learning more efficient ways of doing things, because I have the time to do that. Eventually I won't have the time because I would just be more focused on creating the games. But since I want to get better at creating 3D models, this is how I've been trying to learn. So now that we have the columns pulled out, we just need to pull out these edge loops for the rows. Start from the top row, do the same, and move all the way to the bottom row. And just look at the side to see if it's even correctly pulled out and inflated for your 3D model. You're essentially just inflating the shape, and that gives some curvature around the entire 3D model. And then for this end part, you can actually do an edge slide here And we'll slide that edge to match the shape, and we'll get more curvature around this area for the goggles. And this looks pretty cool already. It's more 3D. It's not super flat like how we started. It definitely works really well. We can move this closer to the head and start aligning this. And you can see how this is coming along really nicely. Everything looks pretty good. The low poly design works really well. It's going to work really well with the simple textures that I've been applying. Now we need to do the same thing for the handle ears. And it's going to be pretty much the same process unless I learn a different process. But the top part, do an edge slide. And you got to think of your 3D models in sections. That way it makes the edge slide process a little bit easier. Now we have the middle part, do an edge slide, and then the bottom, do an edge slide. And then for these edge loops, just pull them out from left to right. And then the top edge loop, pull them out. Again, a lot of these things I'm just going with the flow. It's just how I'm going with the sketch. I have no idea how these are going to turn out. I'm just practicing with the characters that I have. So I'm not really trying to be a perfectionist with this. I try my best to visualize it and then make adjustments as I go. Not everything's going to come out perfectly like how I imagined it, but it'll come out at least something that makes sense. And then when your 3D models have this kind of weird, I don't know how to explain it actually. It's just weird geometry, I guess, where we did the edge slide and also where we pulled out these edge loops. I guess this is what they would call an n-gon because it's not a quad, and a quad has 4 sides, or a triangle has 3 sides. So this one, I think that's what they call it, would be an n-gon. So whenever I have this shape, I just kind of knife it from one end to the other, and this one's creating a triangle in the front. That way, from this angle, you can see we're looking at it from the front, and then where we made that cut is actually creating a quad. And you just need to fix these edges by deleting some of them to make sure you have quads instead of triangles. Dependent on you, just make sure your shapes are either quads or triangles and you'll be perfectly fine. At least that's how I've kind of learned it. It makes your topology so much better doing it with quads and triangles. I try my best to make everything quads. It's just easier to apply your textures, but I did the same thing for the bottom, knifed it to create that triangle in the front. That way the 3D shape actually makes sense. Like from the front view, you can see where the curve is. And then from the back view, we kind of have this column for the low poly design, and it makes sense. And that way your shape looks a lot much better from every perspective. You can definitely see how the shape is from the way I cut it. And it has a low poly design. So it has a aesthetic that works really well, keeping it as a prototype character. And I'm actually duplicating this collection so that we have a backup of the mirrored version. If I ever needed it, I'll have the mirror versions ready. I can actually apply the mirror modifiers because we don't need the mirror modifier anymore. We just need the actual shape, because for the ears, we're going to need to use another mirror modifier to mirror it to the opposite end to create the right ear. It makes our life so much easier doing half the work. And then select the eyedropper tool or the pipette, I think that's what it's called, and select the head. And that mirrors the handle ears to the opposite end. And then for the goggle eyes, I'm applying a shrink wrap because I want the goggles to actually fit nicely over the character's head. So shrink wrapping it on top of the head would actually align the square shape to our rounded shape. At least that's how I thought about it. It made sense in my head to try it. So for these mirror modifiers, you can just click these toggles if you want to see how it looks like without the mirror modifier on. If you click the screen looking toggle, it will hide the mirror modifier. That way you can see how it looks like, because I was thinking maybe we don't need the mirror modifier and we just have these exposed vertices, and then we'll use those vertices to shrink wrap it to the head 3D model. So I isolated the goggles, selected the vertices where the opening was, and added a vertex group, renamed that to shrink wrap, and click assign. When you do this, these vertices are assigned to that vertex group. So anything that you apply to that vertex group is being applied to all those vertices that you selected. And you can do that for pretty much any shape. And I think I've used this a few times for my past characters. And then for the goggle eyes, I'm applying a shrink wrap. So I'm just experimenting with all the things that I've learned, because every time you learn something new, it's like adding to your tool set or adding to your skill sets. So the more you learn, the more you know. And I do it at my own pace because I try to remember all the other things I've been learning to make sure that I actually do it from muscle memory and not just a one-time thing, because you got to be able to know how to use the technology. In this case, I'm using Blender. So you got to be able to know what these modifiers do, and you have to have done it multiple times with different 3D shapes or different separate objects. And then also when you're creating a whole bunch of stuff, you'll know, okay, let's use shrink wrap or mirror or any other modifiers Blender has to offer, and that makes a lot of sense. So I make sure to learn the process as best as I can multiple times, because then it becomes very familiar to me to actually use specific modifiers. And of course, there's going to be multiple ways to think about how to use modifiers. And I don't start learning everything at once just yet. I just learn what I need at the moment in time. Even though it's super simple, that's all I need, and I'm just going to continue that process over and over until I need something else, and then I'll start learning a new method and adding on to my skill set. That's how I kind of do things. I just try to do things very slowly in the beginning. Sometimes I move fast, sometimes I move slow, and that's going to be perfectly fine. Everyone moves at their own pace. Everyone has their own journey. It takes time to learn things. You can't just do everything right off the bat super fast. Not everything is super easy. That's why. And things take time. Like if you've been watching all my videos, you'll notice that all the things that I've learned already took a lot of time to even get to this point. We're on character 3.6. And you got to think about all the stuff that I've recorded. That's pretty much a lot of stuff that I learned. You can see some things that I'm repeating over and over as a pattern. And that's like a framework that I stick to. Anything that's a pattern that I notice is normally a framework that I think is super important to always repeat in my own workflow process. And then I can actually improve that pattern once I'm aware of it. Since we have the shrink wrap ready, we just need to add the vertex group of shrink wrap. And you can see the goggles. It's applied nicely to this rounded part of the head. That's why I really like using the shrink wrap. It works really well. It combines two different shapes with the different vertices. It just looks really nice. There's different options at the bottom. You can select any of these four to see how they look like. I still got to experiment with a lot of them. I just click it to see, okay, do I like this? Nah, this doesn't really look too good. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. Maybe I'm doing it right. Who knows? But if it doesn't look good to me, I'll just switch it to another one. It gives you a different style for the goggles. This one looks super interesting. It's like nearest vertex is kind of like it's a part of the shape actually. So that's entirely up to you. And then for target normal, it looks similar to the original setting. But normally I just keep it the same, either target normal or whatever the other option was. I forget now. Nearest surface point. It's entirely up to you. It's all subjective. And again, I try not to be a perfectionist. Just pick one. At the end of the day, just pick one. But we're always going to have a whole bunch of options throughout our entire lives. That's what causes decision fatigue for me. When there's a million options and I have no idea which ones to choose, I just pick one and just go with that. And if I liked it, great. If I don't, I'll just pick another one. It just makes more sense to me. I try my best not to have too many options. It just makes making decisions really hard because picking one is so much easier for me. And then you actually know once you pick. And then once I have that option, I just go with that option all the time. So that's how I do things because it's been working. It's just getting me through the entire process super quickly without having to spend too much time making that one decision that can stop your entire process. Because I can literally spend time figuring out how this shrink wrap works, but is it going to be very important for this character or even important for the project to keep it going and getting us to the end of the project? No. The best decision to make right now is just to pick something and then move to the next part. So that's how my brain thinks. That's how I just do things. And that's how I've been creating all these characters. That's how we're even at character 3.6. If I was always nitpicking every little thing about how the characters look like, how everything should turn out, then I would still be on an early character, probably be on the first character if I always did that. But I'm just trying to do things as quick as possible. Let's get it done, get through the entire thing so we can move on because we got a lot of things to do. We can't always just keep trying to make everything perfect. We still have a lot to do with this character. And you can see we've already did a lot. We created the head, we created the goggles, we created the handle ears, and we still have a lot of things to do. We're in the beginning still, blocking out the character. So if you're creating super complex characters, it's going to take a very long time to block everything out, especially if your character isn't simple. If it's like an actual 3D model of a character, I'm talking about like a humanoid character of a head with actual eyes, a mouth, and a nose. And then you have the limbs with the body, with the legs, and even apparel is also things you got to consider if you're making clothes, shoes, pants, and then you have all the collectibles, and then you have anything that you're going to be using within your games. If you have like swords, shields, all that stuff is going to take a lot of time. You got to think about that. So I try to just focus on getting the character done first. And we start going into creating the game mechanic before we even think about anything else. So I add another cube, and this cube is going to be for the nose. That's why I scaled it down. And if you want a long nose, just scale it out like Pinocchio. It's entirely up to you. That's what I thought of. Pinocchio with a big nose. And we want the nose to be somewhat pointy in a sense. So in edit mode, do some loop cuts in the middle. That way it gives us the middle vertice, and then you pull that out, and now we have a sharp nose. And we could add a subdivision surface modifier. This way it creates a more rounded shape. Turn the viewport to 2. If you want a bigger nose, you can scale that up. So you can do pretty much anything with all your vertices. You can drag them out, you can move them to any location. It'll create the shape that you like. It's all just visualization. As long as you can visualize it, then you can create it. And I went back to viewport number 1. It just works a little bit better for our little poly design. Fits much more nicely with all the other shapes. And then I isolated the shape so we can just delete the back half. This half is pretty much within the character and we're not going to be able to see it. And if we want this nose to be connected to the head, which is more rounded, we can do the same method. Select the vertices where the opening is, add a vertex group, rename this to shrink wrap, add shrink wrap modifier, select the target, which is the head, and then add the shrink wrap vertex group, and then select one of these options. Now connect your nose to the circular head. It'll make a lot more sense. You can drag this around and those vertices will stay connected to the head. And that makes everything much more smooth with this entire process. So let's move this to the Character 3.6 collection. You can start to see that creating 3D models can get a little bit complex because if you have a whole bunch of parts to your character, there's going to be a whole bunch of things that you need to do. And so far, we've only gone through the blocking out portion, but we've already created 4 3D models pretty much. And it's only for the head. But we're pretty much done with the head now. I got a little distracted. I was looking at my phone. I saw a quote. It said, "It takes courage to do what you do. Keep going." So I really hit the spot. I know it took me a very long time to get to this point of creating these characters and then also documenting everything and narrating. It does take a lot of time. I guess it takes a lot of courage to even do it. I'm actually been excited to have this all ready for my YouTube journey. I'm actually curious what happens if I recorded all these videos and then put them on YouTube and then get to that point to see, will this come into fruition for me? I'm actually very curious. And that's why I even started going on this journey, because I actually really like creating games. I actually really like creating characters. I want to create all the things that I have in my mind. And really the only way to do it is just to create content as a content creator. Because now with the way the world's set up, everyone can actually be creative and just put things out and they just get paid for doing what they love to do. So that's why I'm giving this a try. Making sure that I at least try this once in my life and get to the end to see what happens. And it'd be nice, of course, if I can continue to do this for a very long time. But at the same time, if it doesn't work out, there's always going to be something else to do. But I would really love to do this for a very long time. So that's why I'm giving it a try. I'm trying my best, trying my hardest to make as much characters as possible, learning as best as I can, putting all my creations out, and then seeing what happens. I've learned a lot so far, and I think it's been very important for me to make a comeback, and this is what I'm doing with all of these characters, with all these games. Hopefully one of them will work out. If not, that's okay. I've enjoyed my time creating all these characters. I've learned a lot. I think I can use a lot of these skills that I've learned already, and we're just going to keep going and figuring it out. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, so this isn't really bothering me much. This is just part of the process of being an entrepreneur. You start with an idea and then you go with the flow, and then eventually that idea starts unraveling, and then you start seeing a whole bunch of pathways where this entire project can go, and it can go super far, it can go super short, but I see a very, very long path with this entire project that I've been on, and I'm just trying to get to that bullseye at the end of the day, because I see this as a very long-term thing, and I'm just really gonna go for it, because this is like a dream for a lot of people, and being able to document it and showcase what it takes to even get to the end of your dream is a pretty cool process to see. And I just think, why not me? If everyone else is creating content and documenting their entire process, and they're able to live the life that they want and do whatever they want and do the things that they love to do, so why not me? Why not? That's what I think about, and I'm just gonna be going with the flow, plowing through, because that's just who I am. I have a very strong work ethic and I just keep going no matter the cost. That's just how it's always been, and I had years of practice of doing this. So if you're very new to entrepreneurship, I suggest to get your practice in. Get used to taking hits, getting hit in the face a million times. You still gotta get up no matter what. And I've been doing this for a very long time already. That's how I keep going. It's just part of who I am now. All right, kind of went off on a tangent again, but what are we doing? How long has this video been already? Oh shoot, it's already been an hour. I've been trying to make the videos a lot more shorter, but I end up talking a lot more now. I've gotten used to narrating, this entire process. Just I guess I'm just excited to go through my entire process and narrate everything so that I have reference points for myself. I always talk about this a lot in my past videos. I like having all my explanations for what I did for the characters so I can always go back and review everything. But yeah, I could just cut the video here and then we'll just continue next time, I guess. Or we just keep going in the next video. All right, so we just finished blocking out the head, and I could use this 3D model the way it is. We're pretty much done with creating character 3.6, Goggles, the boy. But if I use this 3D model in a game, it would be some sort of rolling game because we only have a head for the character. It could be a jumping or bouncing game similar to character 1.4, the nose stash guy. Or we can actually add a humanoid body to this character. And that way we can actually use Mixamo for the animations, and we're able to use this character with the joystick mechanics that we've been coming up with. So that's what I decided to do. Let's add a body to this character. And this method I've done before for some of the previous characters. I forget the numbers. It's getting too crazy to remember things. I'll need to create a spreadsheet to write down details of each character actually, because right now it's getting a little too crazy to remember all the little details, and I would have to review all the videos to actually know. But I can actually tag this point in the video with the other characters that I did the humanoid body as well. Yeah, but to create the humanoid body, the method is pretty much the same. You add a plane and then go into edit mode, merge all these vertices that I created by clicking collapse, and it collapses all the vertices into one. I don't know if you can see that, but it's where the cursor is. But then you would add a skin modifier, and then a subdivision surface modifier, and also a mirror modifier. But the mirror modifier has to be above all the other modifiers. I should have added the mirror modifier first, but I forgot the order. But this is supposed to be the order. It's supposed to be mirror, skin, subdivision. At least that's how I remember the pattern or technique. So a lot of things you do in Blender, it's going to be techniques. And if you can quickly think about it, that's how fast you can create your 3D model super fast. For the subdivision surface modifier, change the viewport from 1 to 2. And now you have this circular shape that you can create the body. If you go into object mode, you can scale this down so that you start with a very small sphere. This way, when you start extruding and creating your shape, it starts out creating a stick figure like body. And then from there, you can scale it as best as you can to create the actual body. So I extruded down and I pretty much created the neck, and then I extruded down again to create the chest area. And if you go in X-ray mode, you can see all your vertices. So far we have 3 vertices. Just kind of think about your character in parts. So now from this vertice, extrude it to the right. And since we have the mirror modifier, it will mirror to the other side. So we only have to do half of the work. And you can think of this as the top portion of the leg and then extrude down, and that creates the leg itself. Bring it close together. You can kind of visualize it right now and make a decision on how your character size is going to be. I want this to be like a character that has a big head but a tiny body. So that's why I made the legs super tiny. But also you have to think about the rigging process in Mixamo. You got to make sure your body parts are clear so that when you rig it in Mixamo, all the animations will come out correctly, or at least the rigging process will work. And then back to the top vertice, extruded to the right. This is creating our upper arm and our shoulders. And the vertex where the groin is, you can mark the root in the skin modifier. I still gotta look up the definition for the reason why we mark the root, but that's just the technique that I've learned on how to create this humanoid body for all my characters. Like I said, I don't really look up definitions. I just kind of follow the technique, and if it works, it works. But I should look at the definition to see what it does. I just don't want to spend that time to ruin my flow and my process, because everything's been working. I've been able to create all the characters so far, and it looks like my references. That's all that really matters to me at the moment in time. Maybe in the future I'll need to know some of the definitions to better explain what I'm doing. But do you really need a definition of what's going on? You only really need to know how to create things. And I've just been explaining my technique and my processes and all the frameworks that I've been learning. So I think that's already important enough to create the 3D models. Because knowing too much information is also not good, because then you're not really applying that knowledge. So I try to learn what I need to know and then apply it, because then you'll actually remember all the things that you learned. Otherwise, if you're learning a whole bunch of stuff, you're going to just forget it anyways if you're not actually putting it into practice. So from this vertex for the shoulders, we'd extrude this out, start creating the rest of the arm. And if you need to better visualize your character, you can select these vertices at any time. I'm selecting the one where the chest area is. Press Ctrl A, and it'll allow you to scale it in all the axes. You can type in any of the axes as well, X, Y, and Z, and scale it that way. You can see we inflated the chest area. You can start to see this body coming out really nice. And then the top vertice, we start creating the neck by extruding another vertex, but I guess I didn't do that. It's usually good to have a neck though. It just works much better in Mixamo for animation. And I'm grabbing this groin area, scale it up, You can see it inflated our character. This body looks pretty good. And make sure to keep an eye on your topology. You can see it with how the shape turns out. So make sure it's not all over the place, because later on when you apply all your mirrors, your topology has to come out perfect. Otherwise, it's going to be an issue. So far, the humanoid body looks pretty good. I can keep it this way if I wanted to, but we're going to try to make it a better humanoid body. Extrude from this vertex to get the forearm. And then from the vertex at the bottom, start creating the feet by extruding it in the y-axis and then constraining it to the y-axis by pressing Y. Then you create some little feet. And then from that vertex, press Ctrl A to scale it. You can see whenever I constrain things to an axis, if one of these lines show, the green color line is the y-axis, so that's what I was constraining it to. If other colors show up, like the red axis, that would be for the x-axis, and then for the blue axis, that would be for the z-axis. So that's how you would be able to tell. And you can see it really depends on how you want to inflate your character. So you got to make that decision, just scaling in all the axes or in individual axes and seeing which one you like best. And there's multiple ways to do this. So you just have to pick one again. Like I've been saying, if you have so many decisions to make, you're just not going to make any decisions. So just might as well just pick one and go with the flow. You can always create more characters and try other things. Try not to be too perfect with the entire process. And this process is easier for me because I only had a reference of the head. So anything we do for the body is just going to be free form. So I really have nothing to compare to. I'm just going with the flow, seeing what I like and what I think will go best for the body. And then we're just going to go with that. So I think I'm trying to create some unique legs here. So I'm just scaling it in a specific way that it looks different than all the other characters that I've worked on. And also we can always reuse all this stuff. Remember that. These bodies can go with different heads. So you can create different type of characters with just the same 3D model. And that's the benefit of making all your 3D models, is that you can always reuse them, but also you can sell them to other people if you need to. Just makes the process much faster. And then for the vertex of the arm, we can start to create the wrist and the hand by extruding a little bit out and then extruding again. And then from the wrist vertice, extrude to the right side, extrude to the left side. So this is basically starting 3 joints for the fingers, and then extruded all of them out to create your fingers. And when you move your vertices, you can see your 3D model change. It's not as squished and it deforms much nicely. So that's how you would fix it if you're using this method. Just move things around to make sure things aren't squished together, and that will make everything look much nicer at the end of the day. So if you want long fingers, you would just stretch this out and then spread them out a little bit so that it actually looks like fingers. And then to fix the hand area, just select that one vertex and scale with Ctrl A, and it should fix that area. You might need to adjust the fingers. And then once you have somewhat of a body, if you want to make their arms a little bit shorter, just grab these vertices, move them closer. Maybe you want some short arms. And then if you want to make them all smaller, you can scale them all at the same time, make everything skinny. Right now he has very long fingers, and I'm grabbing the vertex where the hand is, scaling it up, and it looks like we inflated it. That's how you would create the hand. This is going to be very simple for the character, but it already looks pretty cool actually. So you can see how we were able to create multiple things with all the different techniques. You just have to remember that entire process, and then you'll be good to go. And I like doing this way because you have single vertices for different body parts, and you can scale them up and down to create the body shape. And then you don't have to worry about the entire 3D model and messing up the topology, because all the modifiers are taking care of it for you. If you want to make the body longer, just select the middle vertices, drag it down. Then you have short legs, longer body, short arms, big hands, a lot of things you can do. And this is just one character. Have fun with it. Don't try to be too perfect about it. You can always reuse this and then build upon it next time for another character. That's what I've been thinking about for a lot of my humanoid characters. I could just reuse this because the next time I use this, I don't have to think about the body type. I could just use that and then think about possibly creating clothes. And that would be pretty cool, starting that process. But I don't think I've created clothes just yet though. That's just another separate object that I have to worry about. I'm trying to simplify everything. So I moved this to the character 3.6 collection, rename this to body. And once we have a body type that we like, all we need to do is apply all the modifiers by clicking this apply all modifiers button. But make sure this is the body part that you really like, or you can create a backup of the body and then you can return to that version if you need to. But I forgot to add the neck. So that's why I extruded this area at the top. And the neck is usually super skinny, so we have to scale this down. That way the head connects at the neck, because in Mixamo, the head moves up and down and rotates with a lot of the animations. So having the head connected to the actual body won't really look good. So having the neck actually works really well. And since that's the final body, and that's the one I liked, I just applied all the modifiers. And then once you apply all the modifiers, when you go into edit mode, you can now see the topology for our body. And from here, you can start removing things like the top part where the neck is. We can remove this area. That's not being visible anyways. We have a head for this character, so we got to get rid of that. And then we can use the shrink wrap method to connect the head to the body by selecting these vertices, creating a shrink wrap group, clicking the sign, add shrink wrap. We don't need to do this, but it helps. So for the target, select the head. For the vertex group, select the shrink wrap. And then choose any of these different modes, whichever looks best to you. That way the head's always going to be connected to the body, though we move everything around. So yeah, you can see I repeated the shrink wrap method over and over in this video. That's because once I have something that works, I can apply it to any parts that I work on, and that's helping me practice and learn this process. And now we have this process for character 3.6, Goggles the boy, and we can always refer back to this video if I need to remember what I did, and we'll be able to use a lot of the things that I did, like the shrink wrap method, humanoid body method, a whole bunch of stuff. I don't have the actual names of all these methods. I just remember the different patterns, and then I apply it whenever I need it. And that's how I've been doing things. So for these handle ears, same thing, any faces that we're not going to be able to see within your games because it's being blocked by other 3D shapes, just remove their faces, and then you can use the shrink wrap modifier to shrink wrap it to your 3D models, and that keeps everything connected. And then for the head, if you want more subdivisions to create more curvature, just increase the viewport to 3. Entirely up to you. It all comes down to your own aesthetic that you like for your characters. Some people like it really smooth. Some people just like the low poly design where it has more sharp corners. Just really depends. I can move these goggles forward, and the modifiers are super useful. I really like using them. It just makes everything so much easier for me. I'm looking for simple methods to create my characters. I really don't want to spend too much time. If I need to, then I'll do it, but I'd rather spend the least amount of time with the character design for now in the beginning. And then if I need to return to it, then I'll spend more time polishing it towards the end. And I'm duplicating this collection again, naming this with shrink wrap so that we know these are the separate objects that are shrink wrapped. I tend to just create backups for every little part of my character because now we might need to apply the modifiers. And again, keeping the shrink wrap modifier is fine. I mean, it makes the UV unwrap portion easier if the shape is symmetric, because when you use the shrink wrap modifier, it actually changes the shape because the way it wraps around the other 3D models isn't going to be symmetric. So you gotta be careful about that, but if it doesn't really matter to you, then it shouldn't be an issue. So I applied all those modifiers for all the separate objects, and we're pretty much done with blocking out the character for character 3.6, Goggles the boy. And I'm gonna finish UV unwrap on another day. All right, so we get to the UV unwrap portion for Goggles the boy, which is character 3.6. This body looks pretty good. I really like how it turned out. So let's click the UV editing tab. And for the head, you can currently see how it's unwrapped. And we need to switch the texture file to a new texture file. Go to image, new, character 3_6_ texture. We always start fresh. You don't have to. You can always use the same texture if you want, but I do it for practice reasons. Also, it helps me keep everything organized, keeping everything separate. And for the head, you can press slash to isolate the shape. That way you don't have anything else that kind of distracts you. And let's select this middle edge loop, mark the seam, and we get these 2 circular UVs, one for the front, one for the back. This would be a simple way to unwrap the head, and then you would want to organize your UVs. That's why I'm selecting these edges in the middle. You can see I clicked an edge at the top and click the edge down, and then click the edge in the next row, and then another edge in the row after that. And you can see how the UVs are unaligned on the left side. So we need to align this. Again, you don't have to align it, but I do it for organization purposes. I just like everything aligned before I even start putting any textures onto my character. I'm going to rotate this clockwise and just get that middle line in the middle. It's probably going to be the same thing for the left side, but you want to double check by flipping the 3D model to the back side and then just clicking to see if it's the same. And you see the top edge is on the right side. And then when I move down the row, the edge is moving towards the left, so we need to rotate this counterclockwise. That's how I do it. There's probably a better way to do it, but that's just easier for me. It makes a lot more sense. That's why I have the 3D model on the right side of the screen, and then on the left side you have the UVs, and it makes a lot of sense when you're clicking with UV sync selection. It's straightforward on what I'm doing. And then scale these down, place it anywhere on the texture. It can even be outside of the texture if you want, because we're going to be organizing everything towards the end anyways with all the separate objects. We're just quickly doing this so that it's located in a specific position on the texture. And now we can move to the eyes, which are the goggles that we created. These are some pretty cool goggles. You can say it's futuristic. I have these vertices selected in the back. We can also mark the seams here. And you can see mark seams doesn't show because I'm in vertex select. You have to be in edge select in order for mark seams to show. And you can switch by pressing 2 on your keyboard. That's pretty much the hotkey. So it's always 1 for vertex select, 2 for edge select, and 3 for face select. Pretty self-explanatory. And then when you mark the seams, you can see it unwrapped on the left side. And then we need to align this as well, selecting the edge in the middle, starting at the top, moving down, and then on the left side, you can see the orange is starting from the left, moving to the right side. So we just need to move this clockwise to align it. And just by looking at this, you can definitely understand how UV unwrap works. We mark the seams right behind the opening. So that's the outer part of the UVs. And then within the UVs is the goggles. And you can see and visualize that shape right in the middle, and it makes a lot of sense. And if we were in material preview mode, we would have seen the black color being applied on top of our 3D model. So that's how UVs work with textures. If you're still unfamiliar with that, I have a bunch of videos of me unwrapping my characters, and you can definitely just watch through all of them to see how I unwrapped everything and how it applies on top of my characters. Makes a lot of sense. You'll definitely understand the process very quickly just by watching my videos. And now we need to unwrap the ears, which are these handle type ears. So we can do it down the middle again, just by marking the edges in the middle. And this is the most simplest way you can do it. You can do more complex unwrapping, but that's entirely up to you. I just like to keep it simple in the beginning. It's easier for me to explain, especially in the videos. And then later on, when we get to the more complex characters, I can actually explain that much better because we've already have a foundation and a base of what I've been doing. And it will make a lot of sense if you've been following along. So mark that seam. On the left side, you can see there's 3 UVs, 2 curved ones, and this one circular, oval looking one is most likely the ones at the top and bottom. I guess it would be the holes. And you can always select that UV and highlight it to see if it's correct. So I'm selecting these faces here to see if I need to cut this some more or mark some more seams. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. So the one we marked the seams for is the 2 curved ones on the right of the texture. And then the circular one is the handle ears that we didn't mark the seam at all. This side is the circular one, and you can see it being highlighted on the left side. So we need to mark this seam as well. I thought the mirror modifier was still on, so we didn't need to unwrap both sides. So that would have been a more smarter thing to do, by having the mirror modifier on, and you just mark the seams for one of the ears, and then you'll have the UVs for both sides, and then you would apply the mirror modifier. I always mess up the order. Sometimes I just apply the modifiers and I forget I need to unwrap later on anyways. So that's something that I've been working on to make sure that I'm not inefficient. But I tend to forget because I'm excited to just see it being applied to the other side and seeing the entire character design. That's why we have to unwrap this twice. And also when you shrink wrap, you can see where the opening is. It does mess up the shape because it's being shrink wrapped to the circular head portion. So now this area at the top has a weird shape. So be wary of that when you're using shrink wrap. It's entirely up to you. You don't have to apply the shrink wrap, but it's probably better for the UVs if you don't apply the shrink wrap. Because if you're going to stack the shapes on top of each other, the UVs aren't going to overlap correctly. Just because you can see the end parts aren't straight. So that's something to make note of. But I mean, you can still stack them on top of each other regardless. It still works because we're just going to be using solid colors anyways. So it doesn't really matter. They can be misaligned and it'll still work. Sometimes they're aligned, sometimes they're not. But they're only going to be taking one location in the texture space anyways. Doesn't really matter much. I'm just explaining just because makes it easier to understand if I do explain it. And then for the nose, we're going to do the same thing. Mark the seams where the opening is, and then it will be highlighted in orange. And I always have to turn on UV sync selection because I always turn it off. And this is the UVs for the nose being unwrapped. Select the middle edge, move your way down, and you can see on the left side, the orange edge started at the bottom. and then moved up to the top. So we need to rotate the entire thing 180 degrees because the UVs are upside down right now. And then just click from the top, move your way down. And then when you click the edge at the top, you can see the orange highlighted selection, which means it's aligned correctly now. Scale this down, place it somewhere on texture. And it's probably best to place it outside of the texture when you're unwrapping each 3D object. That's because if you overlap things later on when you select everything, you can see our UVs are overlapping each other. And then you would have to select it and move it out the way, which is essentially wasting time. It's much easier to have it out of the texture and then organizing it later on. But either way, we still have to organize it. So however you want to do it. So for the UVs, if you want more high quality textures, you would have larger UVs. If you don't mind having low quality textures, you can have smaller UVs. The smaller ones doesn't require a lot of pixel space, but the larger ones do if you want super detailed textures on your characters. I'm just experimenting, so I'll scale it down just to see what happens. We're just using solid colors anyways, and I haven't gotten to a point where I'm going to be using high quality textures just yet. I haven't really gone back to some of the characters to really see what textures I want to apply on top. It's all just been solid colors. It makes a lot more sense for me for my prototype characters, and that's just what I'm going to be going with. And this is how I decided to align the separate objects for the head. Again, these are just placeholders. I'm just placing it randomly on the screen, just practicing on this entire portion of the UV unwrap section. And then for the body's always tricky to unwrap. I mean, I've gotten used to it. You get more familiar with the process as you go. And for the body, it's always easier to imagine your body in groups. The body would be another cut, and then the legs, and then the shoes or feet. The arms would be two separate cuts. You can just mark it down the middle, similar to what I did for the head objects. That makes a lot of sense to do that. But if you want different colors for different body parts, it is probably best to separate it. But you can definitely see what happens when we mark the seam down the middle. So when you mark the seam for the body, it's not going to show on the left side just yet. So if it's blank, that's correct. What you have to do is press U to unwrap, and then you'll get the UV sync selection option. So that's something that's probably going to be unclear when you're unwrapping the body, because it might feel like, oh, it's not even working and I might be doing something wrong, but you're not doing anything wrong. It's just not being unwrapped live because we haven't unwrapped the shape just yet. We have to manually do it first, and then it will do it automatically after. But I'm just looking around the character because I plan to do some texture paint on the 3D model. So the first thing I see is kind of like pants. I do want some pants for character 3.6, Goggles the boy. So I'm marking this seam right here, and it makes a lot of sense why I marked it there. That's where I think the pants is going to be, and then above it is like the body or shape or the shirt of the character. And then just kind of look around to see where else you would mark the seam. So at the bottom, of course, he's going to have shoes, but which edge loop am I going to be selecting? Most likely this one right here, because these are going to be somewhat like mid tops. That makes a lot of sense. And we can keep it kind of like this because we have the upper portion of the shoe and then the bottom portion of the shoe. But the heel part seems a little bit too big, so we could move this line technically. So I'm selecting these edges down below. That would make a lot more sense than the seam that we already marked, because the top portion of the shoe should be like a main color, and then the bottom of the shoe should be like a heel. So like a different color, like a white. And then we need to do the same for the opposite side. And the fastest way to do this is to cut your body in half. That way you only have to mark the seams on one side and then use the mirror modifier. And it will mirror it to the other side, and then you can apply that mirror modifier, and you only have to mark the seam once. But I was practicing during this time, so I'm going to be marking the seams on both sides just so that it makes sense what I'm doing and I'm able to explain it. And the arms and the hands looks incorrect because the arms isn't going to be split in the middle like this. So we're going to need to separate the hand from the arm by marking this circular edge loop where the end of the wrist is. This is all just visualization. Just think of your own body and all the clothes that you wear. Where would the seams be on your clothes? You can just look at your clothes and you can notice where they mark the seams. And that's technically where you would mark the seams for the clothes on your 3D model. That's how I think about it. And I'm practicing, of course. I am not a professional at this. I'm just going with the flow where I think the seam should be. And also I'm just trying things and just having fun with it. Even if I mess up, it's fine because we can always change it. It's not that hard to unmark the seams. You can always experiment to see what you can come up with. And that's the fun thing about unwrapping your different characters. You can come up with different things and then figure out how you want to texture paint it later. And the reason why I unwrap it this way is because it's just easier to color those portions for the areas that we cut. So like in the middle, we have the shirt. We can just select all the faces and it will only select that UV, and then we can just fill in the color for that UV and not have to worry about the other body parts. And this part is a little bit tricky, trying to get the UVs unwrapped correctly on both sides if you're marking seams on both sides. So it's hard to see if you have a bunch of edge loops. You can kind of see I messed up on the left side. It's marked way too far out compared to the right side. But again, you can always go back in and change it. And if it's easier for you, you can count it to make sure that you marked the correct edge loop. You can always look at the shortcuts at the bottom as well. It shows you how many times you clicked, and that can kind of be like a counter for you. And I have to fix the seam on this side. Don't be too scared about this process. You know, I started out the same way, just starting from the beginning and just seeing what happens. It might be a little bit confusing or a little bit scary, but you'll definitely get the hang of it. And then it'll just be a lot of fun after, once you get the hang of unwrapping your UVs. UVs are still annoying to do, of course. It's probably something that I would love to skip, but it's part of the process and you just kind of have to go with it until there's a better way to get past this and streamline the entire process. But it's part of the workflow and you just got to do it. If you want to make your own characters that are 3D and you want to unwrap it with cool textures, this is how you have to do it. So I'm just marking the hands down the middle this way, because technically the way it's in this T pose, the top part is going to be the area that's showing on the outside of the character. So if they put their arm down, it needs to be split in half horizontally like this. And the UVs aren't showing on the left sides because I didn't press U yet to unwrap. We're going to do that now. Once I have the seams all marked, you could have just marked any seam and then just unwrapped just to get the process of the live unwrap, but I did it at the end, which is the same thing. So I pressed U to unwrap, and you can see these are all the UVs for all the areas of my character, and I forgot to unwrap one of the hands. So now when everything's highlighted, you can see it on the left side, and you can definitely figure out which UV is which just by looking at it. It makes a lot of sense. You have the pants and they're all sideways, so we need to rotate it, and these are the front and the back, and you can stack them on top of each other if you're using the same color, because we marked the seams down the middle. That's why there's two halves. And then you have the shirt area. You stack this on top as well. And then these two oval things, I think is the shoes, should be the shoes. If you click UV sync selection, you can confirm it by selecting it. And if it's highlighted on the right side where the shoes are, which it is, that means that portion is the top portion of the shoes. Stack that on top as well. Rotate it so that it's perfectly aligned in case we want to draw something on top. And this would be, I guess, the top of the shirt, I think. I don't know. And then these would be the hands of the character. And this would be a simple way to unwrap the body of your characters. You just have to make a decision on which things you want to scale down. Like the shirt and the pants, probably will want it to be larger than probably the hands and the shoes, depending on what you're going to be doing with the 3D model and the textures. But if you're just practicing, it's fine to pretty much do anything for UV unwrapping. Just practice, see what happens. If you don't like it, you can always scale it up. And if you don't like the scaled version, you could always scale it back down. You can always change your mind. It's really no problem. And now we have everything selected so that we can align all the UVs on the texture space as best as we can. This part is tricky for me. I really think there should be a tool where you would just press a button and it'll automatically organize your UVs. That would make a lot more sense. Just organizing it, there's a million ways you can organize it. And I just randomly place it on the screen just like that. If there's an opening, I can put something there. That way we have everything in its correct location and we save space in the texture. So you can see if you have a lot of separate objects, it's definitely going to take more room on your texture. So you got to be very smart about this process because this is just one character. Imagine if you have a whole bunch of characters that are different and also they have other separate objects or obstacles that you need to unwrap. You're going to need to organize all of that into this one texture space. So you have to be super creative with it on how you do that. But this is how I do it, and I just practice with one character at a time. We haven't gotten to a point where we're going to use one texture file. But I do have some cool videos coming up where I create my own texture file. So that's going to be pretty cool because you definitely want your own kind of color palette. You can use any color actually, but if you want a certain feel for your game, it really depends on what you put in your color palettes. We're done with the UV unwrap portion. That was pretty self-explanatory. And now we're going to do texture paint for character 3.6, Goggles the boy. This is going to be super fun just to get some solid colors on to see what we have for this character. So the character is white right now because we don't have a material for any of the separate objects. We just click the drop down menu for the material, select the material that we've been using for this character set, and click the drop down menu for the image texture and choose character 3_6 texture. We need to do the same thing for all the separate objects, but this time we can just select the material. It will automatically apply that material on all the separate objects. And the black color will show on the top of character 3.6. And that's how we know the texture was being applied, since our texture is black at the moment. So it's like a shadow. You can definitely use it in the game like this, where the player gets a hidden character and they don't know what the colorway is going to be, and they need to unlock it. That's what I'm thinking about right now. This actually looks pretty cool. It's because it's a humanoid type character. You can actually figure it out by the body type, but you can't really tell there's goggles. So let's select the head. Go to texture paint, select the gray color and select the paint bucket. If you do that, you're going to have to reselect the gray color again. So it's probably best to select the paint bucket first and then select the gray color. Otherwise, you're going to have to be clicking twice again. That's inefficient. But we have the gray color for the head. Back to object mode, so we can select another object. Select the body, texture paint, fill it in with the gray. Object mode, select the handle ears, texture paint. Let's choose a darker gray for the handle ears. That way you give it some contrast. And then object mode, select the nose, texture paint, go back to the original gray color, select the object to fill it in. Object mode, select the goggles, texture paint, use the darker gray, select the goggles, and we have the grayscale colors for character 3.6, Goggles the boy. Don't mind me, I just come up with random names, and if it sticks with me, I stick with it. If you guys have a better name, you can just leave it in the comments. Possibly I might switch it. And you can see on the left side, our textures are being applied on top of our character, and you can see where it's placed, and we need to save this texture. And we have some simple colors going on, and we can think about trying some different things now that we have the grayscale colors on. So I selected the goggles, went to edit mode. I had an idea that I wanted to try, so I'm selecting the edge loop for the rows, and I'm selecting all the rows. I press B, and with these edge loops selected, I'm going to bevel this. It's going to pretty much duplicate the edges, and we can create some sort of cool design in the middle because it looked a little bit plain. And you can always add more segments if you need by clicking the menu. I haven't really experimented much with the other options. I just bevel it the most simplest way. And then in texture paint, with the square button selected at the top, that way those faces that we beveled will only be filled when we paint. I selected the black color and then selected the goggles. And we have these jaggedy lines. That's because we scaled down the UVs, so there's not enough pixels to get the type of quality that we want for the texture on top of the goggles. So that's something you have to make a decision on. If you're going to have high quality textures, make sure your UVs are scaled properly. They would probably need to be larger to accommodate, and I'm just adjusting the width to see what happens. You can play with the other settings. I don't hardly select anything. That would just put me down some sort of different rabbit hole in trying to get this correct or trying to make it perfect, but that's not what we want. We just want to fill it in. It's kind of like straight line. I just wanted black straight lines in the middle to give it some sort of like a retro look. And this looked much better since our bevel was larger, I guess, and it is not as jaggedy as before, but this definitely works. And I always forget to look at the face orientation to make sure that the normals are correct. Anything red should be blue. So select the red parts. In edit mode, go to mesh, normals, flip all the blues, means it's correct. And then in x-ray mode, we can actually draw in the mouth. A nice little smile, just using the black color, and doing it with x-ray mode would be much easier to trace over. And you can draw it on the right side to get some sort of placeholder, and then you can fix it on the left side where the texture is. I feel like that method is much faster doing it that way. You can see on the left side, I'm just putting the smile where I saw the placeholder, and the texture just looks much nicer when you do it on the left side. So that's why I did it. Getting a smile is pretty difficult, but you just gotta keep doing it until it comes out correctly. It's much easier to just do it on my Apple Pencil, taking this texture, but doing all that is not very seamless. It's much better to just use your mouse at this moment, have some sort of placeholder for where you draw things on the character, and that's it. And then we move to the body because we're done with the head. Now you can see we have these seams that are marked in orange. You can select one of the faces, press Ctrl L, It'll select all the linked faces from the face that you selected. So that would select the front of the pants and then select the face on the back of the pants, and Control L to select all those linked faces. And now we have the selection for the pants that we can just fill in. That's super simple to select because we unwrapped it correctly. It makes this process so much easier. And also we're just using simple colors, so it makes the entire process very fast. So I select the darker gray, fill it in for the pants. And now our character has some cool pants on. I think this is the best thing you can do for your characters. Just add some simple textures on top and it looks like he's wearing clothes. And we're going to need to do the shoes. Select the face. Control L to select the linked faces. Same thing on the opposite end. That way we don't have to individually select each face. And then go to texture paint, select a more darker color for the shoes. These are some sick mid tops for goggles. The boy, he's gonna look pretty cool when we finish texture painting. And then we need to select the heel portion, select the face, Control L. And that's the pattern you need to remember. Like I said, you just need to remember specific techniques and it'll be much easier for you to maneuver within Blender. At least that's how I do it. Select the paint bucket, select the white color, give it some white soles. This back portion shouldn't have been white actually. We can individually select it by selecting the faces. Probably better to mark the seam, but I'm going to do this super quickly so we don't have to go through that process again. Once we have those faces, go to texture paint, fill this in with the darker gray. That way we actually have the top portion of the shoe as this dark gray color, and then the bottom of the shoe for the heels for a white heel. And that separates the shoes. These are some simplistic shoes, but they're pretty cool on character 3.6. Goggles the boy, gives him a little bit of style, and he looks like he has no shirt on. We could keep it this way. That's a funny part about everything. Looks pretty cool. He's wearing some retro goggles. Has some handles for ears. Let's save this texture and just go in X-ray mode. Just to compare it to the reference. You can see that everything else is pretty much dead on for the head, but everything else I had to come up with for the body. So everything is like a freestyle of what I imagined the character would look like if it had a body, and even the clothes would be all freestyle. So you can see how a simple reference really helps to come up with some sort of concept art. And also you don't have to follow the concept art at all. It's just a guide, and then everything else just falls into place as you're working on your character. A lot of ideas come, at least it does for me, and then you get to experiment with a lot of different things, and it's just fun to be creative, come up with some characters that have never been seen before, and it's just something that you came up with your mind. That's the cool thing about it. And I'm just trying to get some shading for the bottom of the nose. I feel like that would really help the character. I think there's an automatic way to get a better shader for your characters in Blender. I just haven't experimented with that just yet. I'm just going with the solid colors for now, and then just shading it where I think the shade would be for like the ambient occlusions, and also areas where it would be darker. So if you imagine a character having a light on top of the head, there would be some shaded area under the head and under the nose and under the arms. That would be some manual way of doing it. I need to look into the automatic way though. That's why I'm selecting the bottom of the head with these faces so that I can fill it in. But this looks, I don't want to say it doesn't look good. The sharp edges isn't correct. You want it to be a little bit more rounded. That's why I manually did it with the paintbrush. Slightly brush it, undo if you need to. We already saved the texture. Try to get some sort of shading. If it doesn't look good, you can always delete it. I still think shading a 3D model is super difficult for me. There's just so many angles that you can do it as, and there's no real light source that I'm using at the moment. And also I'm going to be bringing this into Buildbox, so the light source can actually change depending on the angle of how I use the character. So that's why I stick to solid colors at the moment with no real shading. Of course, I'll experiment here and there with some shading, but they're most likely just going to be in some default positions of the character. Like under the arms, we would imagine there would be some shading here, because when the arms come down, it should be darker. I'm just experimenting. Like I said, there's a bunch of ways to shade your character, and this is actually good practice for me, getting the shading right, or even trying to figure out how I would do the shading. Because if I did it manually, how would it look? Will it look right? And then we'll have this video to compare to whenever I figure out how to automatically do it within Blender, which I haven't looked into just yet. I know you have to use some nodes to get the shading right, but that will be for another time when I'm not being occupied with narrating some of these videos. So this is how I decided to shade the armpits and the side of the arms and also the head. It makes sense. At least it does in my head. And we're pretty much done with texture painting. That was super smooth. Looks pretty good for character 3.6. Goggles the boy. And now we get to rig this character. And since we have a humanoid body, we can bring it over to Mixamo. So we need to export this, but before we export it, we need to join the separate objects. It's just easier to have one object for the entire character since we have different body parts. So select everything and join them together. It's probably best to select the body last. I always mess up on that order, so I always have to rename the file again to body, which is my default name for all my characters. And then export this to FBX, select one of the previous characters' names, and then just increment it to the current character, which is character 36. Check selected objects, and then I left the export options alone just to see what happens. I normally have to select the correct things so that it works in Mixamo, but I wanted to see if it would export correctly so that I don't have to spend time trying to get the export settings correctly. And then in Mixamo, just upload the character. And the last time we used Mixamo, which is character 3.1, which is Bear. It looks pretty cool. Definitely check out that video if you haven't already for character 3.1 Bear. And that name comes from my niece. She has a stuffed animal or a blanket called Bear. So I just used that name. And we have character 3.6 uploaded to Mixamo, and we can rig this with Mixamo's auto rigger, placing these markers. And I chose the 3 chain fingers for the skeleton, place the blue marker where the chin is, place the green marker where the wrist is, place the yellow markers where the elbows are, adjust things if you need to, place the orange markers where the knees are, place the red marker where the groin is, and then just let it do its thing. And then when it's done processing, you'll see the character rotating his head, rotating his body. And if it looks not correct in Mixamo, like it's off screen or something with the grid, it's probably because of the way we have it in Blender. You can see our head is where the bottom red line is, so we might need to move the character up so that the feet is touching the red line, because the red line is like the floor. And then we would have to select everything, apply all transforms, and then apply the quick origin just to make sure everything is correct for the location, rotation, and scale. And then export this FBX. You can leave the settings the way it is if you're just exporting quickly like that, and then dragging it into Mixamo. And if you're dragging in a new 3D model every time, you always have to place the markers. That's going to be super tedious. The only real way you can avoid the auto rigging portion is if you export your FBX after it's already been uploaded. So make sure to download your FBX and it'll already have the Mixamo rig. So anytime you want to drag it back into Mixamo, you don't always have to place those markers again. That was something I was trying to figure out, and I didn't realize that if I just downloaded the 3D model in the original pose, it would already be rigged. And once that's done, now this looks correct. You should be able to see your entire character when it's done processing. So if it's like off the screen, that means it's probably not aligned correctly in Blender. So this is correct with the feet touching the grid on the floor, and then everything else looks pretty smooth. I always avoid the hands just because sometimes it doesn't come out correctly, but that's okay. This is just a prototype character anyways. And then we download this, make sure to select the original pose. So with this FBX, you can upload to Mixamo to skip the marker portion for the auto rigging, but I keep this file so that I have this file for using in Blender. And I name it as Mixamo, so I know this came from Mixamo. Then I bring it to Blender. During this time, I was trying out the Expykit add-on. This allows you to get animations from Mixamo and bring it to Blender. So I was giving that a try. I've tried it with the other humanoid characters that we worked on, so definitely check those videos out. We definitely did it for character 3.1, Bear. And we import the Mixamo FBX into Blender. And this has a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't realize was part of the rig. I guess the reference was a part of the FBX because we didn't select the correct settings for the export settings. So that's what happened. So I have to export this again. But this time around, I made sure to hide the reference. Otherwise, it will be exported with the FBX. And this is not what we want. So I have to export the FBX again. Drag this in, place the markers again. You can see how this gets tedious, so make sure you don't mess up in exporting your FBX. Otherwise, you're gonna have to redo this over and over, the same process, and that's inefficient. That's what I think. Like whenever you have inefficiencies in your workflow, you gotta figure out how to resolve that and make sure you're able to get through your workflow as quick as possible. And this is something that I always mess up on, but that's fine. I'm not always gonna be perfect in my workflow. And I'm experimenting and trying to get everything done as quickly as possible, but also I'm understanding my own process on what I need to fix. And also, using Mixamo is fairly new to me, so I think we used it for about 2 or 3 characters so far. and we're going to run into some issues, and that's okay. I need to know these things so that the next time I run into it, I can actually avoid it, because otherwise, if you're unaware of these things, you'll just keep doing the same process over and over, and that's just wasting time. I try my best to not waste time, try to do things as quick as possible, and now we can download this FBX in the original pose, and now we can import it into Blender. And this still has the references in the FBX, which is incorrect. We don't want the references. We just want character 3.6 rigged and ready to use. But you can just delete the references, I guess. Otherwise, we're going to have to go through the entire process of Mixamo again. So when you have the FBX that's already being rigged by Mixamo and you brought it into Blender, first thing you have to do is apply all the transforms. That's because there's a weird rotation that's being applied in the x-axis when you bring it to Blender from Mixamo. So we want to zero that out by applying the transforms, and then go to pose mode, select everything under conversion, extract the meta rig, and then this menu will come up, select the rig type, which is Mixamo. And every time I do this with the Expykit add-on, it always adds these additional hand bones at the top. I don't know why it does that, but that's just how it's been working for me. And then you want to offset the knees and offset the elbows with these values, and then select the meta rig and check in front and go to edit mode. I select these hand bones and deleted them. I think we're not supposed to delete them because I know we had that issue with a previous character. I don't know why I'm deleting it here. Maybe it works, but I deleted the chest bones and then these pelvis bones, kept everything the same, and then go to object mode, click regenerate rig, and then we have the rig for our character. And this should actually be the opposite. I just named it incorrectly like I always do. Meta rig should just be the bones, and then the rig should just be the ones with the different layers. Always mess up the two. And this is the final rig that we got from Mixamo, and we brought it into Blender so we can move this around, create our cool animations in Blender if we wanted to manually, or we can bring in animations from Mixamo into Blender doing it this way. That's why I wanted to go through the Expykit add-on a few times just so that I remember this process, and then I'll have a video to always refer to if I ever need to grab any animations from Mixamo and I want to bring it into Blender for any type of render animations. I can do that. That will make the process so much easier for humanoid characters where I don't have to animate anything manually. I can just go into Mixamo, pick some animations, and that makes everything so much faster. For here, I'm looking for a running animation. So I type in running. There's a whole bunch of them you can try. You can just select any one that you want. Unless you want a specific one, you can scroll through. Just select one of them, see what it does to your character. And most of the time you have to check in place so that the animation runs in place, and that makes a lot of sense. There's a whole bunch of animations you can try. And this is the running animation that I chose for character 3.6. So once you have an animation that you like, you can just click download, change it to without skin. That way it only downloads the rig. Press download and then add this to your folder so you know that this is the running FBX. I always try to label these as best as I can. So this one is character 3_6_Mixamo_running. So I know that this is the running animation, and always use the same name that it has on Mixamo. That way you can coordinate to see where this animation came from. And I have the video, of course, I can always refer to. And to bring this into Blender, go to File, Import FBX, select the running animation, and you can see the armature that we added for the running animation. And when you bring it to Blender, you have to bake the animations, and there's a specific process you have to do with this Expykit way. There's actually a better video to explain it. I'll have it below. That way you can follow that tutorial. That's where I learned it from. So I'm just renaming the action to running animation. I think we don't name it just yet, but I was trying to learn this process, so I just renamed it so that I can separate the action correctly. So the process would be to select the rig, shift select the armature of the running animation, go to pose mode, right click under binding, select bind to active armature, and then you get these settings at the bottom. And to bind, select rigify controls, bind target, select Mixamo, and you can see the rig moved a little bit. I don't know if you noticed that. That means it's being binded correctly. And then check chain look at, I don't know, it works much better with the rig. And then select one of the layers on the rig. This part is actually confusing. I kind of forgot this. I skipped this most of the time, but I should actually remember this. So in pose mode, select one of the rig layers on the rig, and then go to binding, select constrain controls, and it'll select the entire rig in blue, and then select one of the bones on the armature of the running animation, and then right click animation, bake constrained actions, and then bake and exit. And this should have created a new action. So you click it, and then the summary, you can see there's a whole bunch of rig layers with all their keyframes. So now that's correct. That's how you would get the animations from the armatures baked onto your rig. So this process is confusing, of course. It took me a few times to learn it, but this is also a great thing to know if you want to have animations brought over from Mixamo to your rig in Blender. And I wanted to learn this process, so that's why I recorded it. I still get confused of it, of course, but it's going to be helpful if you have a whole bunch of animations within Blender. You can just render out some cool scenes. And then when you have that new action, just rename it to whatever name you like. Mine is character 3_6_ running animation. And then if you have any unnecessary keyframe animations that you don't want, just click this drop down menu, click Blender file, go to your actions, delete anything that you don't want in your drop down list. If there's duplicates, delete it. You don't really need that. This is where I delete files within my Blender file. That way to keep everything organized, so I know, okay, these are all the files that I worked on. There's no duplicates of anything to keep it unorganized. And then we can hide the armature because we don't need that anymore. We can just have the rig and our character. And when you bring it into Blender from Mixamo, I don't know why it does this, but your character is kind of like transparent. I forget how I fixed that, but that's how it's going to look. So it might look like it got messed up, but it didn't. That's just how it is. And on the left side, you can see this summary has a huge list of a whole bunch of rig layers that were animated. So that's why this complex animation is pretty awesome. All this animation would have took a lot of time, but we were able to use the presets from Mixamo, which makes everything much faster. It definitely would have taken me a lot more time to do all these keyframe animations. I can definitely do it, but do I really want to spend that time when there's already options out there that I can use? This is just faster, and the only way to get your games done is to find the fastest way to do things. And I went back to solid mode to see my character with the texture in front while it's being shown with this running animation. I think this is pretty cool, bringing it into Blender to have the complex animations. Definitely this running animation is way more smoother than the animations that I work on, but I'll probably get to that point when my animations will get this smooth and pretty dense with a whole bunch of rig layers. Then we need to duplicate the body to create the outline. Outline is always simple. We've done this many times. Mask modifier, solidify modifier, outline group in the vertex group. Select it in the shell vertex group of the solidify, flip the normals, high quality normals, change the offset, adjust the thickness, outline group in the vertex group of the mask modifier, add a second material, move the solidify modifier above the mask modifier, and material index offset to 1. Then we have our outline. The outline is going to be shown in material preview mode. Don't worry about the transparency. This is how it is. Gonna select the rig, make sure to select everything. That's why it's highlighted so that we can export the FBX. Check selected so that we can export the FBX. We'll save this. All right, so we have our running animation for character 3.6, Goggles the boy. And if we want to have multiple animations, we can also just search for that in Mixamo. And what other animation do we need? An idle animation. So I type in idle, and there's going to be a bunch that you can choose from. Just click through to see which one you like. They're all very different, and got to make this decision based on how you visualize your character, and every character is going to be different, so I would want a different movement. Or if you don't care, you could just use the same idle animation for each of your humanoid characters, and the rig should work for all your characters actually. That would just streamline your entire workflow process. But like I said, I like to choose different ones and practice with my workflow process to see where I would make mistakes and try to do it as quick as possible, if I can, by going through the process over and over, just to see what are some things I would run into. I do have a hard time getting the Expykit workflow down. It's just a lot of steps that you have to remember, but once you do remember it, it makes a lot of sense, and it makes everything easier to have all your animations into one place like Blender. If you want to render out some cool animations or some sort of scene that you would want to do in Blender. I haven't gotten to that point in my journey just yet. I've done a few renders, but they're just plain renders just to see how that process is. There's a lot of things you can go into, and you can go down a huge rabbit hole. but I try to stick to the simple things that I would need in my game dev journey. So my goal is to actually build a game mechanic, so I only have to focus on things that get that job done. So for the idle, I actually decided to go with the happy idle. It looks pretty cool for character 3.6, Goggles the boy, and it will tell you which idle animation you've chosen at the top, and then along with it is your file name, which I named as character 3_6 full mesh. You can see why I'm labeling everything. It just makes a lot of sense. When you're recording everything, you can always reveal your videos, and then you'll know, oh, okay, this is the idle animation I chose for this character, and it's labeled correctly. So if I ever need to refer back to this video, I'll have that video. So that's how I do things. Everything is clearly labeled so that I can just work without any interruptions. And then later on, like I'm doing right now, narrating the video, I'll be able to see what I exactly typed in and the entire process that it took for me to even get to this point. I'll have it all on video. And I click download, and this one's also without the skin. So this one's downloading that animation. And you can see how Mixamo streamlines your workflow process much more faster. I can actually skip the entire portion that I was doing for the animation for my other characters. But again, like I said, you'll also need to know how to animate, because that's always the hard way. And then this way is the short way, or the shortcut way. So it's always good to learn both ways. So if you run into any issues throughout your entire process, you at least know what to do. So if you come across a character that isn't a humanoid character, like I've been mentioning, then how else are you going to animate it? You're going to need to know how to do it the hard way. And I always switch back and forth, because all my characters isn't going to be humanoid. It isn't going to have arms. It isn't going to have legs. Sometimes it's just a blob. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's abstract. Sometimes it just has a head. There's various things that happen to my characters. So I need to know how to animate each one of them. And this is why I learned these two different frameworks. And it works for me. So most likely, if it works for me, it'll definitely work for you guys. Again, this is something that I've been working on just to get my foundation on point. Because if I know the basics, then I won't have any issues along the way. That's what I try to do. I try to run into as many problems as possible throughout the entire process, and then find a solution to see if we can actually create a system for this entire game dev process. And then just rewatch everything that I did and see if we can simplify the entire process so that we can actually repeat the entire process again and again. That way, it's much more simple, it's much more easier to go through this with each character and coming up with the character design, how the 3D model looks like, how to animate it, how to bring it into a game engine and build out a game mechanic, and then try to build out a full game. But that's an entire process on its own, because an entire full game is broken up into a lot of different parts. If you don't know those different parts, you're definitely going to quit, because you're going to run into an issue where you don't know what to do. And even though you have all this information on the internet, you still have to go and be resourceful and look for it. But if you've been watching my content, you'll notice that I'm the one that's doing all that work, being resourceful and searching for all the answers, and then also putting myself as the dummy to test all these different things and all these different theories that I have. And then also, if this workflow works for me, then we all have a solution to build quick and easy games for any type of character that we want. Again, I make mobile games. I haven't gotten into console games just yet. That's a huge project that would require a lot of thinking and also a lot of time to get that workflow process down. There's probably a lot of creators who's done that process and they're much better at it than I am. But for me, I work on mobile games and I'm just more familiar with that process than I am with console games. But hopefully one day I'll get to a point where possibly I'll get into the whole console game situation, or even just make some Steam games. And this will be on, PC, etc. But as you can see, I'm not there yet. All right, once we have that idle animation, go to File, Import FBX, import the happy idle animation, and I labeled that as well. And as soon as I import it to Blender, you can see that the armature is showing, which is the bones. So when I refer to an armature or bones, you'll know exactly which one it is. So the next thing to do is select your rig, shift select the armature, go to pose mode, right click binding, select bind to active armature. Active armature is the correct one, and it will bring up this menu. And to bind, it'll be rigify controls, bind target, Mixamo. And as soon as you set it to Mixamo on the bind target, you'll notice that the rig binds to the armature that we added. That's how you know it's successful. and then make sure chain look at is checked, which it already is. You can see the difference when I click it. It deforms a little bit weird when it's not checked. That's just how it is. Not sure why. So we binded the rig to the armature, and you can see at the bottom, we don't have any keyframe animations. Just because it's binded to the rig doesn't mean that the keyframe animations are being transferred over. It still works because it's binded right now, but we need to bake the keyframe animations into our rig. And this is what this process is basically with the Expykit add-on. This is how we get the animations over from Mixamo, and then we bake it into our rig. That way our rig can have a bunch of animations that we downloaded from Mixamo. So this portion is a little bit confusing. So select a single layer on the rig, and then select a single layer on the armature, and you can see that being highlighted with the blue color, and then right click and click select constraint controls. If that doesn't work, just do that process again. Select the single layer on the rig, right click, go to binding, select constraint controls, and then select a single layer on the armature. Right click under animation, click bake constraint actions, and then click bake and exit. And if it's successful, you'll notice that at the bottom, there's keyframe animations now in the timeline, and it's yellow at the bottom, so you know. And then also at the top, under the actions in the action editor, it has this red highlight for the armature. And if it was successful, when you click the drop down menu, you'll notice that there's an F action, and that F action is your new keyframe animation that you just baked into your rig. And this one is the idle animation that we just downloaded onto our character from Mixamo. And this is the one that you would rename. You can also click play to test out the animation. And then you can see we also have the running animation that we did earlier in the video. So we have two animations for this character now. And for character 3.6, Goggles the Boy, I'm renaming the idle animation now. If you're lazy like me, just go to the action with the running animation, copy that, and then go to the new action for the idle animation and paste that in and just change the running to idle. And you pretty much have the idle animation for character 3.6, Goggles the Boy. And then we can delete that action that we imported in because we don't need that anymore. It's just making everything unorganized. You can tell by the name, it's armature, Mixamo, layer 0. That's usually like the name that goes into Blender after you've imported the FBX from Mixamo. And then I just delete that from my Blender file. Keeps everything organized so that I know all these are the animations that I have for my characters, and that's the ones I save. Otherwise, if you just have a whole bunch of things in your Blender file, when you return to the Blender file, you want to know exactly what you worked on. Otherwise, if you have a file that has a whole bunch of different names that's not labeled correctly, then you're going to run into an issue where, oh, what is this animation? And then you're going to have to go in the process of having to test it out to see what it is. And even though you test it out, you still don't know what it is because it's not labeled correctly. So that's why it's important to actually label things, especially if you have a whole bunch of different keyframe animations for your character. And also, like me, this is character set number 3, so there's other different characters in here with different keyframe animations, so everything should be clearly labeled so that you can identify what the animations are. But yeah, that's how I kind of organize things, because I know I'm going to not use this Blender file for a very long time. We're going to be moving this character to Buildbox so that we can actually create a game mechanic. So then that's another section that I have to worry about, making sure that I get the Buildbox portion all organized and labeled as well. So that's why I do these videos. I narrate everything to make sure that I know exactly what I did for this character and also the workflow process. It just makes everything easier because now we have the technology to do it. Everything now has a lot of memory. We can actually record things, post it, not have to worry about storage. So now everything is easily accessible because we have the internet, we have our mobile devices. We can just always refer back to any type of content that we create, and we'll never need to worry about forgetting things. And you see, this process is way faster to create a lot of animations on the fly. It's definitely faster than creating it manually like I have for my previous characters. So it all depends on how you're going to create your games. I suggest to do both ways just because you'll know how to animate any type of 3D model that you create, and you can refer to all my previous videos on how I did it. It's a pretty simplified process. Or you can just use Mixamo, but then your characters have to be a humanoid character, which is a character that has 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head. Then your game has to go with that type of concept. So it really depends on you, on how you approach it. And this is how I would approach it. And of course, this isn't the end all be all of my process. I'm always improving it to make it more efficient. And it has to take daily work in order to do that. You can tell how many videos it took me to get to this point, and it's going to take me a lot more videos to even get it to a point where it's so simplified that I'll be able to do it as quick as possible, but also do it in a way where everything is high quality. And I want to get to a point where I'll create my full game, and that process is going to take some time, and it takes a lot of practice, it takes a lot of hard work, it takes a lot of discipline. This is what I've been disciplining myself for a very long time for, and we're almost there. So I'm excited to share all this stuff about my characters. It's been a long time coming, and all this stuff is pretty cool, and we're getting to the end soon. And then once we have our keyframe animation for the idle animation into our rig, we can just hide the armature. You can also delete those armatures. We don't really need that anymore. We already have the file saved as the FBX, so if we need to drag it in or import it again, we have it. But now all the animations are already baked into our rig. We don't really need it. So we go to File, Export FBX, and these settings are already set for me because I've already exported it a few times. And just to note, if you open that tab for bake animation, what you would need to do is uncheck all actions. That way it doesn't export your character with all the actions under one name. You'll be able to export your character with one action at a time, and that's how you label it correctly. And you would label it here when you're exporting your FBX. So that's a note if you're using Buildbox. I don't have the content yet. I don't have the visuals to show that right now, but it's probably going to be in one of the character videos that's going to be upcoming soon. So be sure to tune to that. If you want to see that video, just like and subscribe, of course. And whenever that content comes out, you'll be able to see that video. And I click export, and that's going to be the entire process for building this character 3.6, Goggles the Boy in Blender. And this concludes this video. I hope you learned a lot. There's a lot of great nuggets in this video. I feel like the Expykit add-on is super helpful if you want to get a whole bunch of animations from Mixamo into your Blender file with your rig. It's going to be very useful to have all those animations within your character if you ever want to render out a cool animation scene of some sort. But also you'll have those animations for use for any type of humanoid character. If you want to reuse that, that works too. So I could just reuse this body if I wanted to, and that's actually a good thing. So I'm probably going to put that down in a spreadsheet. So be sure to check out the next video where I'll be using this character in Buildbox. I forget if I actually built the game mechanics. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It just really depends on what I'm thinking about at the time of the video when I created it. So definitely don't miss that. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe. Let me know what you think in the comments on the entire process and everything that you've been learning. Let me know if it's helping you. And yeah, I've been trying my best to get through all the videos that I have. It's not easy, but I'm making it through. We're making characters, we're making games the glitchy way, my way, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out. Bam.